Welcome to the Health Fix podcast, where health junkies get their weekly fix of tips, tools, and techniques to have limitless energy, sharp minds, and fit physiques for life. Hey, health junkies. On this episode of the Health Fix podcast, I'm interviewing Dr. Eric Osansky. He's a chiropractor, a clinical nutritionist, and a certified functional medicine practitioner who has been helping people with thyroid and autoimmune thyroid conditions since 2009. He is the author of 3 books: The Natural Treatment Solutions for Hyperthyroidism and Graves Disease, The Hyperthyroid Healing Diet, and Hashimoto's Triggers. He is the host of the Save My Thyroid podcast and the creator of Gut Healthy Thyroid newsletter. Dr. Osansky was personally diagnosed with Graves disease. After seeing how well a natural treatment approach helped his thyroid condition, he began helping others with thyroid and autoimmune thyroid conditions. And today we're going to talk about what happened with Dr. Eric, how he developed the Graves and what he did about it, and now how he's mostly helping folks with hyperthyroidism conditions, but he definitely does see folks with Hashimoto's. And we dive into, a lot of the triggers for autoimmune conditions. So if you're listening to this and going, well, I don't have hyperthyroidism, and you don't have Graves, doesn't matter. This is a great podcast for anybody wanting to learn more about how gut, about how toxins, about how viruses and other things can impact your body and cause autoimmune conditions. It's also a great podcast I'm going to recommend to share with someone in your family, someone you know that might need to hear this info, because autoimmune conditions are on the rise. Autoimmune conditions can go together. You can have more than one. And we don't need to be going to drastic measures like actively radiating our thyroid or removing thyroids or even medications if we don't have to. And Dr. Eric shares some really sage advice in this podcast. So I'm excited for you to listen to Dr. Eric Osansky and I chat all about, yes, hyperthyroidism, but also autoimmune thyroid conditions. Let's introduce you to Dr. Eric Osansky. Dr. Eric Osansky, welcome to the Health Fix podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jannine. Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I could not turn down someone to talk to about thyroid conditions in general, and of course Graves, because we have not dove into any of that on this podcast. And so, of course, I wanted to bring that on. And gosh, I don't know if you've noticed this, but it seems like every single day I am getting someone coming in and we are finding autoimmune antibodies and talking through what to do about the thyroid in general. So probably going to hear that from you quite a bit. And of course, since it's your specialty, you probably do get that. But do you feel like things have been on the rise in the last decade or so? Because I know you've been practicing for a while.
Yeah. I definitely do feel like there are more and more cases of Graves and Hashimoto's, which is what I deal with. So I imagine other autoimmune conditions, that's the case as well. But yeah, definitely I've seen a rise over the years.
It's just, and in one of your books, of course, and we'll get to those books there, guys, he's got a website, savemythyroid.com/book. You can check that out. We'll put it in the podcast notes. But in particular, Graves, and I saw the big toxicity sign there. And I think for a lot of people, we've now woken up to like, okay, the universe is a little toxic, our food's a little toxic, and I say little, totally pun intended, with little. And it seems that, with the rise in the toxicity, a lot of people are getting sick, but it's also like, why do some, why not others? What's this thing? And for most of the people listening to my podcast that may have autoimmune types of conditions, I know the biggest question I got when I said, hey, I've got someone coming on thyroid, they were like, okay, tell us how to fix it, how to prevent it, how to prevent our children from having issues, and the whole 9. So we've got a lot of questions for you today, Dr. Eric. But first and foremost, now you came to specializing in thyroid conditions because you had Graves yourself. And of course, because it's heavily tied to toxicity. How do you feel it came about for you? Kind of what's your thought process in terms of how it showed up for you?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I definitely think stress was a big factor, and not to say it was the only factor, but prior to my Graves' disease diagnosis, most people deal with stress. If not everybody deals with stress, but I was also overtraining. I was restricting calories. So I was doing a lot of the things I should know better with my background, but still, especially the overtraining, I just wasn't listening to my body. And even when I was diagnosed, I it took an adrenal saliva test to really convince me that my adrenals were in as bad shape as they were. I mean, because I knew stress was a factor. I just thought I was doing a good job of handling at least emotional stress. Again, I still ignored the overtraining until again when I saw especially when I saw the adrenals, and I like what really was just evaluating my situation and realized I need to stop the overtraining, eat. I mean, I needed to make some changes with the diet, and then yeah, the emotional stressors. That's always a work in progress.
Oh man, I think that is one of the hardest things for a lot of folks, myself included. And I think we also live in a society where at least a lot of us who are in our late 30s, 40s and beyond, I think we've been kind of primed to be like, just suck it up, just keep going, just keep doing it. It bites us in the end. It bites us in the end. So in terms of your overtraining, because I think a lot of folks are going to be like, what were you training for? What were you doing? What were you up to?
Yeah, and it wasn't like where I was running marathons or doing triathlons. It wasn't that extreme. It was just really going to the gym and working out longer than I should, more intense than I should have, just doing high intensity interval training without the intervals. So just really high intensity nonstop and just, going to the gym really for an hour, doing too much cardio, not focusing enough on resistance exercise. So that was probably the biggest factor as far as the overtraining. Like I said, I wasn't running marathons or doing anything crazy. I mean, I've had patients that have done that where they see me and they're doing triathlons and I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe we need to at least take a break from that while healing. But with me, like I said, it was just really just it was the cardio, but just going to the gym and just not listening to my body.
I think that's common for a lot of folks. And you also mentioned that you paired it with the restricted calories. And I think for women in midlife, that's one of our things, we're like, oh my gosh, I'm gaining weight. I got to cut calories and I got to speed up and get more, cardio in. And so I'm sure a lot of people are hearing this going like, now, another big question I have, about it in terms of the cardio side of things, that's someone's like stress management tool too. Was it your stress management, like main stress management tool back in those days to train hard and then you felt better in terms of just getting some of the cortisol at that time out of the system?
Yeah, without question. I mean, even today, obviously now I'm not overdoing it, but still, it's when I go to the gym and I work out and I do some cardio, but definitely more resistance exercise, more weightlifting. And yeah, I mean, definitely back then it was a form of stress management, getting, yeah, like you said, the increase in cortisol and epinephrine. So yeah, it definitely felt that high. But I mean, pretty much after the workout, I was wiped out. So during the workout, I felt like I felt that high. Afterwards, like I said, it was the signs were there. I just wasn't paying attention. But yeah, I mean, exercise. You're right, because a lot of people think about exercise as a form of stress management, but it's a little bit different because you're in more of a sympathetic state compared to that parasympathetic rest and digest. So I think it's, of course, important for people to be active and exercise. But, and again, if you do it the right way, it can certainly still be a form of stress management, but obviously it's a little bit different than blocking out time to incorporate mind-body medicine techniques.
Yeah. I wanted you to just kind of share it with us because I think that is one of the big areas where a lot of people will end up kind of running themselves into the ground, trying to find the right balance between getting their dopamine hits with their workouts, but also trying to get the weight down, trying to keep the body healthy, and then it just compounds on them. So you mentioned the cortisol testing, the saliva cortisol testing. Of course, we talk a lot about testing on the podcast here. What's your favorite go-to for that? I mean, are you still doing those kind of tests now with your clients? And what did you see on yours? What did it show up as?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, I still, so to answer, there's a few questions there. So I definitely still look at adrenals, look at the circadian rhythm of cortisol. I don't exclusively use saliva test. I still do a lot of saliva testing. I like the company Diagnostics.
Mm-hmm.
I also use some Dutch testing, dried urine testing, which looks, of course, not only at adrenals, but also looks at sex hormones and how you're metabolizing the hormones. So it really depends on the situation. But when I dealt with Graves and I did the adrenal stress index test from Diagnostics, I had low. My first two cortisol levels were in the tank. They were like a 6 and a 4, and which is pretty low. And my DHEA was a 2, which I've seen worse DHEAs. You could have a 1. I think that's like the lowest on the. I mean, it's not as big of a scale. It's like I think 3 to 10 is the range, and 3 is borderline low. So ideally, you want like at least a 4. So I was a 2, and then it looks at 17 hydroxyprogesterone, which was also low. I forgot the number. I think in the maybe like 20 or something like that. And then it looks at secretory IgA, which, as you know, lines the mucosal surfaces of the body, including the gastrointestinal tract, and that was like undetectable. So yeah, so it was so pretty much everything was low. Everything was depleted.
My goodness. And so, for a lot of folks listening, they might be thinking like, "Oh man, this is a possibility," but you were still functional. And then I think for a lot of us, we'll think our cortisol is that tanked. We may not be functional. We may be, really fatigued. Most of the conventional medicine, of course, is going to say, oh, it's either, Addison's or not, kind of extreme. And you're proof that there are some degrees along the way of how the adrenals become insufficient and fatigued of sorts. What's your terminology in that case? Because I know a lot of people kind of balance or delicate balance around how they say this, because we don't want folks to be thinking that the adrenals are dead, because obviously we would not be alive.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open-minded. I mean, if someone wants to use the term adrenal fatigue, I mean, I tend to use, you hear HPA axis dysregulation. So I use that more, but not everybody's familiar with that. So you got to give a little bit of an explanation about how the hypothalamus communicates with the pituitary, and the pituitary communicates with the adrenals. And of course, the pituitary also communicates with the thyroid gland. So you could have dysregulation of the HP, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, just like you can have dysfunction of the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis. And so, yeah, like I said, if I'm having a conversation on a podcast and someone brings up adrenal fatigue, I'll go with the flow. But yeah, that's, I don't want to say it's outdated, because still a lot of practitioners use it. But yeah, I mean, I will say, yeah, you're right though. Like, everybody's different, because with that pattern, you would expect fatigue, and I definitely did not experience fatigue. And part of that might be because of the hyperthyroidism. Like, hyperthyroidism increases in a lot of people energy, and not everybody. Sometimes it also puts a lot of stress on the mitochondria, which could lower energies. But again, that's why you just never know. I'll consult with people with hyperthyroidism and their adrenals look like mine, and they're definitely fatigued. And then there are other people where their adrenals are, again, looking like mine, and they're not fatigued. And then there are people with high cortisol and they're fatigued. And you would say, oh, well, they shouldn't be fatigued, because they're in that's still that fight or flight stage. But again, there could be other factors, as we know, other than adrenals, that can cause fatigue.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you gave that breakdown there, because that is kind of the crux at which a lot of folks come to us, because their symptoms are all over the place. Maybe they're not following a particular pattern, or just in the autoimmune realm, because there's so much overlap. And so, of course, we're going to talk about the, overlap between Graves and Hashimoto's here in a second. So, of course, my biggest question next, though, on you, and the reason I want to go through this, just for folks who are listening, like, why are you drilling them so much? I want to see your trajectory of how things unfolded, because for a lot of people, it sometimes takes a while to get a Graves diagnosis, unless we've got the obvious eyes bulging, like really kind of crisis situation. So you had the adrenal testing done before or after you looked at the antibodies for the thyroid. How did that play out in terms of your investigation on your health?
Yeah, that took place after. I mean, what happened is, again, so I was overtrading, under eating, and I was losing weight, not realizing. I mean, I'm sure some of the weight loss was due to my overtraining and under eating, but one day I was walking around a retail store, and they had one of those automated blood pressure machines, and I took my blood pressure, which was normal, but my heart rate was 90. And I was like, well, I was walking around, maybe that's it. It wasn't like truly resting. So the next few days, I just manually took my heart rate, my pulse rate, and it was anywhere between 90 and 110 beats per minute. And that's when I realized something was up. So I went to a regular doctor, like a primary care doctor, and he didn't test the antibodies. He just tested, I think it was TSH and T4, which confirmed hyperthyroidism. And then it took a few months before I saw an endocrinologist who did the antibodies. Again, of course, knowing what I know now, I mean, even back then, not knowing what I knew, I probably could have just tested my own antibodies, but I was just I'm just follow the recommendations of the doctor. So I went to the endocrinologist and got the official diagnosis with the antibodies for Graves, and then that's when after that I started doing the testing. So in between that, I was kind of feeling sorry for myself and just like I'm just wallowing in my misery and just because it's different. I mean, again, it's a shock to anybody, but especially when you have a natural healthcare background, whether it's chiropractic or naturopath, you feel like you're doing a lot of the right things, even though, again, I wasn't doing a lot of the right things, but you feel like, hey, you know more than, the average person because you went through the schooling, and it's just, again, another lesson that really anybody could develop these conditions, no matter what your background.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate you being real on that because, a lot of times folks will think that, because you're healthy, because you have the background, that you have a leg up, and anybody, these things can happen to anybody. It's just kind of like the perfect storm and things that happen, and blind spots too. So one of the biggest things that I would love you to kind of dive into, and one of the things I wanted to dive into for folks, is really looking at the overlap between Graves and Hashimoto's, and so the hyper and the hypothyroid conditions that are autoimmune, because a lot of folks, will ask me, can I have Graves and then go to Hashimoto's? And can I have like a thyroiditis condition where the thyroid gets inflamed, and then can I end up in a Hashimoto state? Because I've heard stories where people have kind of had the hyper picture and then the thyroid crashed out on them. So kind of give us your story on what you've seen with the overlap between the two, and if you experienced it yourself, or how things play out for a lot of your clients.
Yeah, so again, obviously both Graves and Hashimoto's are more autoimmune conditions than thyroid conditions, and I will say that, I mean, in my case, I just had the antibodies for Graves. There's three, I guess, for those who are unfamiliar with like the antibodies. So there's three main antibodies. There's the most common antibody, most common thyroid antibody are thyroid peroxidase antibodies, which are also known as TPO antibodies, and those a little bit more closely associated with Hashimoto's, although a lot of people with Graves also have TPO antibodies, but they're still more close. TPO, thyroid peroxidase, is an enzyme that's important in the production of thyroid hormone, and so if you have that antibody, that is, you're more likely to have damage to the thyroid gland, like lower over time. I mean, not everybody with TPO antibodies has hypothyroidism, but again, more likely to have hypo than hyper. And then there's second antibody is thyroglobulin antibodies. Those are definitely more specific for Hashimoto's, and what thyroglobulin is, it's a protein of the thyroid gland. So when you have thyroglobulin antibodies, that could indicate that your immune system is damaging that part of the thyroid gland. And again, over time, that's more likely to result in hypothyroidism. And then we got thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins, the third type of thyroid antibody. So those are more specific to Graves. They stimulate the TSH receptors of the thyroid, which is what leads to hyperthyroidism. It's, like I said, in my case, I just had the TSI, the thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins, but a lot of people have the 2 or 3 of those antibodies. It's not uncommon for people to have the antibodies for both Graves and Hashimoto's, and so that kind of relates to that overlap. Now, when they're seeing me, usually they're predominantly one or the other. Like, usually it's not like they're bouncing back and forth. I mean, not to say that can happen, but more like, for example, if someone has hyperthyroidism, if they're diagnosed with Graves, they might have the Hashimoto's antibodies, but they're usually presenting with hyperthyroidism. And again, over time, that might switch to Hashimoto's. And again, I see the opposite too. Usually I see more commonly a person with Graves disease. They also have the antibodies for Hashimoto's, and again, our goal is to try to prevent them from making that switch over. But it is more common, it seems, for people to have Graves and eventually switch to Hashimoto's. Even though, again, it's a little bit tricky because it's essentially they might have the antibodies for all three. So when I say they switch to Hashimoto's, they didn't really switch. They had those antibodies. Many times they had those antibodies for a while. Now, which ones they developed first, the honest answer, we don't know. Like, again, because we don't do predictive antibody testing. So I know with Hashimoto's, those antibodies could be around for sometimes 10, 15 years before it affects the thyroid, and on a blood test, and then of course symptom wise, with Graves it does seem like to be a little bit quicker, because if someone has experienced the more hyper symptoms, it's more noticeable. So it's not to say it can't be like someone can't have those antibodies, for many years before symptoms develop. It just seems like it's not as long as Hashimoto's, just because when someone develops symptoms, it is more noticeable. But yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but the overlap, I mean, there's definitely a lot of people that have the antibodies for both Graves and Hashimoto's. And most of the time, they're presenting with either more hyper symptoms, and hyperthyroidism on a blood test, or again, Hashimoto's with that elevated thyroid stimulating hormone, the elevated TSH. So, but yeah, we definitely see that overlap quite a bit.
Well, and really because it leads back to one of the big things that I heard you mention on your website, on your video, about the thyroids being removed, right? Or radioactive iodine situations and things of that nature. When, do we really need to do that? Or is it just an effect of toxicity? And of course, there are cases in which thyroids need to be removed or radiated, and there's nothing else that can be done. But when we look at it, like with so many people getting this, it's an essential part to our body. What gives? There's got to be the triggers. And so I would love for you to talk about what you've seen in cases of where folks go for the radioactive iodine treatments, where they don't have to even go as far as having thyroids removed in all kinds of extreme types of situations. And in this case, give us a little scoop in terms of that, so folks can kind of understand that you're able to help people not have to have those kind of extreme treatment.
Yeah, so I mean, like you said, there is a time and place for conventional treatment, including thyroid surgery. But unfortunately, a lot of people get the radioactive iodine and thyroid surgery who don't need to get that. And so there's what's called the triad of autoimmunity, or also known as the three-legged stool of autoimmunity. And that doesn't just pertain to Graves and Hashimoto's, even though that's, of course, this conversation, but really all autoimmune conditions. There does seem to be a genetic component, which is that one component of the triad, and then a second component is exposure to one or more environmental triggers, and then a third component is that leaky gut component, that increase in intestinal permeability. And so we can't change the genetics. We can modify the expression of genes, but we can't completely change genetics. But by finding and removing triggers, healing the gut, correcting other underlying imbalances, we can reverse the autoimmune component. And I hate using the word cure, just because there is that genetic component, even though, again, it feels like I've been cured. There's also been times when I felt like I relapsed, but thankfully didn't. Like when I had certain infections, like I had chronic Lyme disease and COVID and all that. But anyway, so yeah, like it definitely is possible. Now that doesn't mean it's easy to do. It does take time, and sometimes it can be challenging to find and remove the triggers. I mean, I always recommend to start with diet and lifestyle factors, clean up one's diet, block out time for stress management. So again, make sure you're not overtraining, and getting sufficient sleep. But many times you need to go beyond diet and lifestyle in order to, like, if you might have an underlying infection that you need to address. I mean, you mentioned earlier the impact of environmental toxins and toxicants. It's just crazy the amount of toxins and toxicants we're exposed to. And obviously we can't completely eliminate our exposure, but we could do a lot to reduce our exposure, to reduce our toxic burden. And so yeah, I mean, that's really just in a nutshell. Again, I make it sound easy, but like I said, it's not, because I mean, and some cases are, I don't want to say easier than others, but I mean, it's very common for people to hit roadblocks. But every now and then there'll be someone I work with, and they're progressing without a problem. Their antibodies are lowering. They're feeling better. Like, it's a gradual process, but more times than not, it is like a roller coaster ride when someone's recovering, and you just got to be prepared for that. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, again, like the body is complex, autoimmunity is complex. But the reason you want to address the cause of the problem is, I think I mentioned earlier, if you have one autoimmune condition, you're more likely to develop other autoimmune conditions in the future. And so if all you do is, if you get radioactive iodine or thyroid surgery, and again, there's a time and place, and if But even if you do get those, you still want to focus on the immune system for someone, let's say, with Graves. And same thing with Hashimoto's. Unfortunately, Hashimoto's, most people are just given a prescription for levothyroxine and nothing's done for the autoimmune component. So same thing with Hashimoto's. You can address and reverse that autoimmune component as well.
I'm glad you mentioned the roller coaster component because I've definitely seen that in my clients as well. And it can be really frustrating to see this up and down and up and down. What is your typical sequence of running the antibodies? Because I think a lot of people want to see their antibodies every test, that lab test you do, and I'm like, well, I don't know. What have you found like a good sweet spot so that you're not getting too much disappointment along the way in checking antibodies?
Yeah, I mean, it varies, but I usually recommend for blood, like to do a thyroid panel like every 6 to 8 weeks. So I do like to keep on top of that. That doesn't mean they have to do the antibodies every 6 to 8 weeks, but like, TSH, free T3, free T4. And then with antibodies, I think it's fine if they want to, like if they do it every other time, like rather than now, some people want to do it every single time, and I don't think I mean, like you said, it could be frustrating, like if you do it and then, every 6 weeks, let's say, and then, 6 weeks later you see an increase and you're like, oh yeah, okay, and then you do it another 6 weeks and it like increased a little bit. It's like, oh no, I'm getting worse. And, so it's, I try to keep expectations in check for like if someone wants to do like I'd rather them check it every 6 weeks than check it like every 6 months. I think that's a little bit too long to do, but again, like you said, like if they're doing it every 6 weeks, it's going to be that roller coaster ride a lot of times. Not all the times, but again, it's not uncommon. It's more common than uncommon to see the increases and decreases. Yeah, so again, I just need to let them know that like if they do that baseline test before we get started, and then 6 weeks later, if they choose to look at the antibodies and it's worse, it doesn't mean that what we're doing isn't necessarily working. It's a little bit too early to come to that conclusion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for backing me up on that one. Thanks for backing me
Yeah.
up on that one. Now, in terms of reversing autoimmune conditions, because obviously I've kind of shared in previous podcasts, and you heard my one where I was talking about my lupus antibodies going up and down, and you were talking about viruses, and you're talking about exposures. There is this intricate connection between the immune system and the nervous system and exposures and how the body really kind of will cause a flare. I call them flares, Please give us a little bit background there on terms of like, okay, how are you managing triggers? What are some of the like core things that you're like, people need to be thinking about when working to reverse autoimmune conditions? You had mentioned the gut, and yes, a ton of folks in my industry are gut, but it's more than that, really. And that's what I've kind of figured, and everybody kind of has their special sauce. Give us kind of a little look into what is your protocol for helping folks with reversing autoimmune
Yeah,
conditions.
sure. So, I mean, again, just looking at some of the different categories of triggers, there's food. I think most practitioners, that at least the ones that I know of, including myself, will recommend to avoid inflammatory foods. Like gluten is almost always recommended to be avoided by just about all functional medicine practitioners. I mean, some say it could directly be a trigger, but there seems to be no doubt that it can affect permeability of the gut, increased permeability, and that leaky gut component is part of that triad of autoimmunity. So yeah, just trying to avoid the common allergens. Again, dairy falls into that category. I'm not saying everybody has to avoid dairy permanently. Again, some practitioners would say yes, some would say no. I think some people could reintroduce dairy later on. That's just my experience, but while healing, I usually would recommend avoid gluten, avoid dairy, take a break from grains, take a break from nightshades. Again, doesn't mean everybody reacts to those foods, but just that's part of an elimination diet. Is not everybody's going to react, but you want to try to get rid of the foods that are people are most likely to react to, foods that are most likely to have negative effects on the gut. It goes without saying, at the very least, you want to try to avoid the processed foods, stick with whole healthy food, try to eat organic as much as you can, avoid the fast food, stay well hydrated, drink not only water, but purified water, try to avoid water out of plastic bottles, which also can act as endocrine disruptors and affect the thyroid in a different way. And so food, of course, is extremely important. I mean, there's someone could be following I don't want to say perfect diet, because there really is no perfect diet, but someone could be doing amazing with the diet and not getting good results. And that just is telling us that there's more in that person's situation than the diet. And it gets frustrating because you could join now. There's like all these Facebook groups, and I have a couple of them, and then you'll join, and you'll have some people saying, "Oh, all I did was eliminate gluten, and my antibodies dropped." And like we just said, even one test doesn't tell the whole story, and it could have been other things. But and then someone else followed an autoimmune protocol, an AIP diet, and they're no better. And again, it comes down to everybody's different, and there's different triggers. So food is one. I mentioned stress, and stress, one thing I didn't mention was trauma that kind of falls. So it's not just about recent stressors and just being stressed out because of your job and doing too much. And I mean, the overtraining definitely is something important, which is why I brought it up. But even past traumas can dysregulate the body, dysregulate the nervous system, and that could be a factor, and that could be a challenge, and just a lot of people don't think about that. And I also have been one that really, I don't want to say completely dismissed trauma, but really just over the years focused more on just regular stress, like fight or flight reactions and fight or flight responses. But then I had some people on my podcast who spoke more about sore trauma and just convinced me that, yeah, it definitely could be a factor. And then seeing people who addressing the trauma, healing compared to just blocking out time for doing incorporating mind body medicine, which again, that could help, but it could be a factor even with stored trauma. But many times people need to go beyond that and do things like nervous system retraining and stuff like that. So the stress, the trauma, we mentioned infections. So certain types of infections can definitely be a trigger. In the literature, H. pylori, there's a correlation between H. pylori, Graves, Hashimoto's. I know correlation doesn't always mean causation, but I have seen in my practice, I've seen the challenge is we're not just like, if someone has H. pylori, that's not all we're doing. We're not just saying let's treat H. pylori and ignore the diet and stress management and everything else. So if we treat H. pylori and they're cleaning up their diet and stress management, do we know 100% that it was the H. pylori being like getting rid of the H. pylori? No, we don't. But if I see it positive, I'm going to recommend, again, a natural protocol. I'm not going to recommend for someone to get the triple, I think now it's quadruple therapy, getting multiple antibiotics. Again, it's up to them ultimately. So if they choose to do that, but usually I'll just encourage them to take more of a natural approach. Same thing if there's like parasites, or again, without question, viruses could be a factor. We saw an increase in people coming in during the pandemic, and yeah, so infections could definitely be a factor, and then the environmental toxins and toxicants. So just I mentioned the plastics, which are widespread, and plastics, microplastics, nanoplastics, you just really can't escape them. But they not only are endocrine disruptors, as I mentioned, but they also do affect the gut. They've been shown, which I didn't realize until I started diving into the research, that affecting permeability of the gut as well. And so many things affect permeability that we don't know of. And then there's, of course, glyphosate, which many people do know that affects the gut microbiome in a negative way. And we know that heavy metals like mercury and lead, can have obviously negative effects on our health. So just trying to, and then mold. I didn't mention mold and mycotoxins. You're hearing a lot more about mold, people becoming more aware of the impact of mold on our health. So yeah, it's not, so where do people start? I mean, again, they start with the foundation. So I'm not saying you go crazy and you do like every single test to look for infections and heavy metals and all these things, and and everybody needs to test for mold. I mean, some people recommend that. With me, it's definitely start with the foundations, clean up your diet. I do like adrenal testing. I do like comprehensive blood testing. I do a lot of stool testing, but I don't do it in everybody. I can't say I have 100% of my patients do like a GI map or GIFX, but I do a decent amount of those. It really comes down to the health history, and the truth is, testing is not a perfect science. It's one of those where you could be conservative and then you miss things, but then on the other hand, you could do a lot of testing and the person spending a lot of money unnecessarily. So it's really just trying to get that balance. And sometimes I do testing that I think is going to show something and it turns out to be looking good. And then sometimes I just, I recommend more conservative testing based on the health history. and then we end up needing to do more testing later on. And when I dealt with Graves, again, I did basic testing. I didn't do a lot of tests and got good results. So that's why I tend to be more on the conservative side. But like I said, it depends on the person. If someone's health history indicates that mold might be an issue, then yeah, I'm going to recommend, let's do a urinary mycotoxins test and or, test your home for mold. If someone has a lot of gas, bloating when eating certain foods, maybe we'll do a SIBO breath test, for example. So, like I said, it really does depend on the person.
It's good to hear you say that. And I think for a lot of people listening, they're like, okay. Because I think so many people are convinced that functional medicine means like when you go to the doctor, they're going to test everything, whether you need it or not. And truthfully, yeah, the comparison of like what someone presenting with, what's obvious. Let's, look at what's obvious. Now, one of the big hot topics in the thyroid realm is iodine. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it going to kill us? It's one of these hot topics that is fascinating to me in terms of how much press it's gotten in the last, I would say, year or two over all the other minerals that are out there. So what have you seen with iodine? What have you seen with even some of the other minerals like selenium and magnesium for the thyroids? Either way, being Graves, being Hashimoto's, being just general thyroid health. What's your take on them? What have you found to be beneficial, and what have you seen work well for your folks?
Yeah, I mean, all minerals are good. You just got to be careful, so there's really, I wouldn't say there's like a bad mineral like iodine being bad. But I mean, to first address the less controversial minerals like magnesium and selenium, yeah, I mean, I think most people could benefit from selenium. And then there's a debate, well, can I just get the selenium from Brazil nuts and not take a supplement? And I mean, the answer is yeah, but the problem is we don't know how much how much selenium is in a single Brazil nut. It varies. So I do recommend, when I recommend selenium I usually recommend supplementation while healing, but I don't take, I actually eat Brazil nuts on a wellness basis rather than take selenium supplements. So, but again, I'm not taking it therapeutically. And so I think most people could benefit from selenium with both Graves and Hashimoto's, including those I didn't mention, but a lot of patients have. I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit, like thyroid eye disease, very common. And again, selenium could help reduce oxidative stress and sometimes could help with that as well. So yeah, selenium, magnesium, a lot of people are deficient and a lot of people can benefit from magnesium. And yeah, so I mean, let's talk about iodine. Also zinc. I mean, they're all important.
Yeah.
So we could zinc's important. I mean, there's really all the nutrients are important. But yeah, iodine's a little bit different because iodine, it is important for a formation of thyroid hormones. So we definitely need iodine. But I guess the problem is that there's some practitioners that recommends really high amounts of iodine, and then there are other practitioners that recommends the opposite. So there's like Dr. David Brownstein, iodine, why you need it, why you can't live without it. Again, his book has been around for a long time, and he was one of the first practitioners who recommended higher dose iodine for really both Graves and Hashimoto's, and including myself, a lot of practitioners jumped on that bandwagon years ago and was recommending to do urinary iodine testing, like an iodine loading test, and if someone's deficient, to have them supplement with iodine in milligram amounts, not microgram amounts. And then you got other advocates like Dr. Tatis Karazian, Dr. Alan Christensen, who recommend the opposite, like very, very, very low amounts of iodine, like really trying your best to avoid supplemental sources of iodine. And I mean, there's no research I'm aware of. So let me backtrack before I say what I'm about to say. So like I said, in the past, I personally took higher amounts of iodine and I personally had good experience with it. And as a result, when I first started practicing over 15 years ago, I recommended for all my patients to do urinary testing. And then most people would show up as deficient. So I would put them on, again, like higher doses of iodine, maybe not as high as Dr. Brownstein recommended in his book, but still milligram doses. And a lot of people seem to be okay, but I did see some people not being okay. And then around, I guess a few years later, that's when you heard more practitioners like Dr. Tatis Karazian saying like, yeah, you got to be careful about the iodine, and the research is showing the opposite. And the research, there's really not research out there that I'm aware of showing that like you should be taking like 50 milligrams of iodine or 25 milligrams of iodine. And there is research showing that iodine can in some people be problematic in like higher doses. So over the years, I'm definitely not anti-iodine. I've just been more cautious about iodine. I mean, you still hear success stories about people taking iodine and their goiter greatly decreased, and we know it could help with breast health, and I mean, so it definitely has benefits. But again, everybody's different, and that's what makes it a little bit scary. Is that you could have someone take iodine and supplement with iodine and get great results, and then you have someone else take iodine and they might have their hyperthyroidism worsen, or you might see their antibodies spike up. And again, is that related to the iodine or is it something else? Again, sometimes it's hard to make that connection. And again, some will say, well, if you take selenium and other antioxidants with the iodine, that'll prevent that from happening. But it doesn't always. So like I said, I'm not anti-iodine, but I definitely have changed the approach over the years. I can't say I test everybody for iodine and then have everybody supplement with iodine. If you read my book, The Hyperthyroid Healing Diet, and even my other books, Hashimoto's Triggers, Natural Treatment Solutions for Hyperthyroidism and Graves Disease, again, you could tell I'm more conservative now with iodine. I'm not against it. I recommend starting slow if you are going to supplement with iodine. I should say I'm not really nervous about someone taking a multivitamin with iodine or eating some foods with iodine. But it depends. If someone's eating a lot of, like kelp, which is really high in iodine, and some people can cause problems. And again, if someone's supplementing with iodoral, like really high amounts, again, some people will do fine, but others won't. And you just don't know who will fall into that category. So I didn't give you like a straight answer. And part of it, when I'm on these podcast episodes too, I never know what the person interviewing me is thinking too, because I was on a podcast, and again, not to say if someone loves iodine, I'm gonna like say, oh yeah, everybody should take 50 milligrams of iodoral. But again, I've been on podcasts where I pretty much gave what I just spoke about iodine like I did now, and the person was heavily in favor of iodine supplementation, and then they weren't too happy about me like saying that not everybody should take high dose iodine. But again, that's my perspective. Even if your perspective is different, that's what makes it interesting with because the different functional medicine practitioners will have different perspectives. You like to think Dr. David Brownstein has had a lot of success recommending high dose iodine, or else he wouldn't be doing it. Similar with those who recommend low dose iodine, they're having. So again, to me, it's like I said, it does depend on the person.
And I'm in the same camp as you, because I've given people iodine and it didn't go well. Their antibodies shot up, their thyroid slowed, and I've had it where it sped up and the other direction. And so, at the end of the day, we don't know. And really, I think that's an important thing for everybody listening to hear, is that, there are certain things that we can't guarantee one direction or the other. Same thing goes with using glandulars too. And so for those of you listening, like, what's a glandular? It's a cow part of a cow thyroid. And here we have a lot of companies now that are selling animal parts. And, I don't know, I haven't seen anything too wild happen, but any stories of glandulars going south on you with folks taking them and the thyroid either sped up or slowed down considerably?
I don't recall any like crazy stories, but I mean, the thing is with glandulars, I mean, some of them clearly have thyroid hormone. Others claim that they like remove the thyroid hormone from the glandulars. So it's just like, you're just taking it for support, but not the. So no, I mean, just yeah, I can't say I've had like crazy stories with glandulars, and yeah, I'm with you. I'm cautious when it comes to glandulars. Not to say I'm opposed to glandulars, but just yeah, you're right. There's not really research, out there when it comes to gland, or at least maybe there is, and I'm just not aware of it. But yeah, and then again, just every company's different, and if it's a company that's not third party verified, you really don't know what's in really any supplement, let alone the glandular. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of things out there you got to be careful about. Like a lot of people, this is a different topic, but methylene blue is big, and then recently I heard where it might negatively affect lactobacillus, which makes sense since it is also used as an antimicrobial. So I'm not against methylene blue. I'm just still learning. Like I still haven't incorporated it in my practice, and I honestly bought a bottle and experimented very little. I took it like once or twice, just like, honestly, I just wanted to see if my urine would turn blue, which I guess I didn't take enough because it didn't like turn like as blue as I would have liked. So, but yeah, again, the like I said, you got to be cautious with these things because, again, it's easy to jump on the bandwagon, just like I did years ago with iodine. So with methylene blue, I definitely took it slower. And like I said, then I heard that it could negatively affect the gut microbiome, which, so I'm still learning about that and other things as well.
Oh my gosh, aren't we all? Aren't we all? Because, I mean, all of the biohacking or biotuning, whatever terminology someone wants to use here, I mean, all of that stuff with like this supplement's hot this week and then next month it's this supplement, and it gets a little overwhelming. I don't know if you feel that way, but I see all these things and I'm like, well, it looks cool, it sounds like they've got great promises, but how do we actually incorporate these things? How do we know it's going to work? How are we doing this safe? It's tricky. I hear you. Same thing about methylene blue, you name it, LDN, a lot of the different popular things that have like came to be popular and then kind of went away, colostrum, all of them. So of course want to bring it back to autoimmune stuff, want to bring it back to thyroids. I think at the end of the day, just what I'm hearing you say and kind of what I've kind of come back to is like the basics, looking back at the foundational causes, looking at the gut, looking at the triggers. You dial that in first before reaching for the medication, reaching for the magical supplement that might help here and there is the way to go. Is that kind of what I'm gathering from you, kind of your take at it? Go back to the
Yeah,
basics, get those
definitely. I mean, I'm not shy about recommending supplements, but that's usually not the solution, is like not to take like 20 different things, 30 different things. If you're supplementing and you're not incorporating the foundations, you're probably not going to heal. Whereas it is possible to incorporate the foundations and do minimal supplementation and heal. Like again, it's supplementation. When I do it, it's really based on like the testing. Like I'll give some general recommendations. I mean, I recommend an omega-3 fatty acid to most people, just because most people, unless if they're eating fish multiple times per week, and then that's the other controversy. Should we be eating fish multiple times a week with the toxins? And anyway, that's a whole different story. But again, we can't deny there's still a good source of omega-3 fatty acids. And if someone's eating fish once a month or not eating fish at all, they're probably deficient. So again, there's, in that case, 100% I'm going to recommend a fish oil or algae oil if someone's like a vegan. But yeah, you're right. Definitely want to start by incorporating the foundations, and then I mean, for some people, incorporating foundations might be enough, but for many people, they might need to go beyond that and do some of the functional medicine testing we discussed.
Makes sense. And of course, you've got your 3 books. And that's over at the website savemythyroid.com/book. Now let's recap the books because you've mentioned them already once, but let's give folks the three books. And then I do want to talk a little bit about your 6 steps to reverse Graves' disease and Hashimoto's naturally, because you already talked about it, but that way folks can get an outline of it, I'm guessing, from the website.
Yeah, so my 3 books. So the very first one I released, Natural Treatment Solutions for Hyperthyroidism and Graves Disease. That was released initially in 2011 and just came out with the 3rd edition in 2023. And so yeah, definitely proud of that book. And then 2018 is when I came out with the book Hashimoto's Triggers, and which is a comprehensive guide when it comes to all the different triggers. Some of them we spoke about here, some of them we didn't speak about. And then my latest book, which came out in 2024, so just a year ago, the Hyperthyroid Healing Diet, and just focusing on different diets. Again, the title is misleading because it suggests that there's one diet for everyone with hyperthyroidism, but it actually talks about multiple different types of diets for those with different types of hyperthyroidism condition, mostly Graves, but other conditions as well, such as toxic multinodular goiter, even subclinical hyperthyroidism.
Cool. Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, subclinical is such, it's a hot thing. I see a lot of folks headed that way. And I really think it is a manifestation of diet and lifestyle. And it's kind of like the pre diabetes of thyroid stuff. I don't know. That's me. But nevertheless, no, you also have a hyperthyroid and a hypothyroid program, as well as consultations that you're doing too with folks as well, correct?
I do, yes. I mean, I do have a program for both, but honestly, I see a lot more people with hyperthyroidism just because of my backstory. And then, just quite frankly, there's just not a lot of practitioners out there that focus on hyperthyroidism. So, yeah, I would say at least 80% of the people I work with have Graves' disease or another hyperthyroid condition. But yeah, I do see people with Hashimoto's as well and work with them one on one.
Nice. Nice. And natural endocrine solutions, correct? That's your website? Make sure I get it
Yeah,
right
well,
here.
there's two. There's because you
Oh,
mentioned the other one, Save My Thyroid. Yeah, so the first one, naturalendocrinesolutions.com, came out in 2010, and so it's been around for now over 15 years. And then the Save My Thyroid podcast came out
yeah.
in 4 years ago, and then I'm like, you know what, SaveMyThyroid.com is a lot easier to remember than naturalendocrinesolutions.com, but a little bit of a dilemma because I have so many articles from
Yeah.
on naturalendocrinesolutions.com, and so I didn't want to really mess with that, so I still have that, and but SaveMyThyroid.com, again, it's easier. That's where I host my podcast, and so yeah, I'm one of the unique practitioners who have two websites.
That's okay. That's okay. And we'll make sure, guys, that we get that on in the podcast notes at drjkrauseND.com. And then, of course, listening to your podcast as well for folks. That'll give them a lot of great insight there. And are you on social media at all? Instagram, Facebook? Do you have anything in those areas?
Yeah, I'm an Instagram newbie. I've only been on Instagram for a little less than a year. But yeah, I've actually been pretty active lately on Instagram. And then I have a couple of Facebook groups. I have a YouTube channel. If you visit savemythyroid.com/YouTube, I believe, or you could just go to YouTube and just type in my name. You could find me that way as well. But yeah, that's how I am on some of the social media channels.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Eric, this has been great to chat with you and learn more about how you're approaching things, but also just hearing, going back to basics, makes me happy to hear. Yes, I'm biased that way because it does seem that we've gotten off in tangents and forgot, we're chasing the shiny, any, magic pills, and really when the reality is we've got to go after the basics. And so, gosh, good stuff. I look forward to checking out your podcast as well, listening in. And guys, we will have all the notes at drjkrauseND.com. Thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Jannine. Really appreciate you having me on, and really enjoy this conversation.
My pleasure. Hey, Health Junkies, before you go, I want to tell you a little bit about something. If you are watching this on YouTube, you probably saw me drinking a pink drink while recording the podcast. Well, that is from my sponsor, Foria Wellness. They are the makers of Mellow. These are magnesium super blends that help with feeling more chill. And hey, let's face it, this day and age, sometimes with all the things going around, we need a little more chill. This is 300 milligrams of magnesium in a pretty powder that tastes mildly sweet, nothing overpowering. It also has L-theanine and GABA. These are things that help calm our nervous system. And if I could tell you anything about the body, if we have a dysregulated nervous system that's on fight or flight mode all the time, we're not as productive as we could possibly be, and we're not as centered, focused, and grounded as we could possibly be. So this can just help you out to get there. So check out Foria Wellness's magnesium super blends and see what you think. There's a couple of them. This pink one here is the pomegranate. There's a purple one that's lavender berry. And then there's one that's called Naked that is just plain, and you could throw it into smoothies. But hey, let's face it, plain magnesium powder isn't as tasty, and I'm always looking for something that's pretty and tastes good too. So if you're looking for a little bit of support when it comes to helping your nervous system get in a parasympathetic chill state, Mellow from Foria Wellness is something to look into. All right, have a great day, whatever you're doing. Hey, fellow health junkie, thanks for listening to the Health Fix podcast. If you enjoyed tuning in, please help support me to get the word out about the podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review, and just get that word out. Thanks again for listening.